As you can tell, I know Karen very well.
Be a bit awkward if it was a stranger.
Unfortunately so. Yes, my apologies for not picking on Gus. I don't know Gus, so I won't pick on Gus.
Hello, Paul. Hello, Maria and Amy.
Hiya, nice to meet you. Oh.
We're going to get started, guys. So thank you for joining us, first of all, for the first... Thanks for joining us for the first live webinar from Maria's Coaching Corner. Just before we get started, I'm just going to go through a couple of rules. So I'd say to keep your microphone and camera off, just to help with the connection, just helps it run a little bit more smoothly. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, if you just submit them in the chat at the bottom, and then Maria will go through them all at the end with Paul. And then lastly, if you can please share this on social media. We're going to get the video out on YouTube tomorrow. So if you can share it across whatever platforms you have, that would be absolutely brilliant. So we'll get started. So Maria, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Just firstly, I'd just like to say thanks, Paul, for giving up your time this evening and to come and speak to us. I know myself and everyone at ParaCoach are really grateful for that, and I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say. So if you would just like to kind of tell us a bit about yourself and what you do for your coaching.
Thanks, Maria. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to your first Coach's Corner. It's quite exciting, and it's an honour to be with you this evening. From my perspective, I coach at Leeds City Athletics Club, and I've been coaching there for the last 21 years, and has been predominantly working with disabled and para athletes through that period of time, as well as then some of the junior non-disabled athletes that have come through Leeds City as well. And then prior to that, I was also a member of Red Star Athletics Club up in Glasgow, and that's really how I got involved in para athletics. And then professionally, I also work for England Athletics, hence the background. But I'm the coaching workforce manager, looking after coach education and the tutor workforce that delivers the coach education program, but also then some of the coach development programs, working with colleagues across all of the event groups, looking how we support coaches across England as well.
So yeah, that's quite a job you have there, and we'll come back to your job, but I was just wanting to find out a bit like what made you want to go into coaching, and then specifically into para coaching, because I know from my own experience there's not a lot of coaches that tend to kind of focus in that field, so it'd be interesting to find out why you've chosen to do that.
It's a brilliant opening question. The quick answer is by accident, really. I got a job up in Glasgow, and on my first day over lunch, one of my colleagues that I was working with just asked what I was involved in, what I liked doing, and I told her that I was an athlete who did 8 and 1500 meters, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting. I know of a blind athlete at a local athletics club that needs a guide," and it just so happened that Jamie's guide had just left to move down to Liverpool, and he was looking for a guide. So long story short is that I got involved with Jamie Cuthbertson at Red Star Athletics Club and was his guide for a couple of years, and that was the start of the journey, really, of getting involved with not just guiding him, but then just helping out with Janice and Ian and Laura Ure, who was at the club, just to help out. And that helped me then just to be able to kind of just enjoy not just participating as an athlete myself, but also then just to be able to help others. And that was the starting point of wanting to get into coaching.
Yeah, and how was it becoming, say, like, you know, the athlete to then the coach, that kind of transition? Because I guess not only were you an athlete for yourself, but you were having to work with somebody else to help them achieve their goals. So how was that kind of transition?
relatively straightforward for me. I wasn't a very good athlete, really, so it was an easier transition, but the helping others then was one of the paramount purposes of getting involved, because then it meant that I was participating and staying fit myself.
Yeah.
But also then I was also then supporting other athletes, and not just Jamie. And then as time progressed, then we set other sessions up, so we started to help more athletes. And the fact that we were able to support more athletes just being physically active in the first instance, not necessarily looking at the performance pathway, that was the first part of the journey for me. And then I got involved in, I got a job as a disability sports development officer in North Lanarkshire. And that was really the start of things to come for then developing more opportunities for disabled people across different sports as well as athletics.
So yeah, you've gone from being a guide, and then now not only do you coach able-bodied athletes, but you also focus on wheelchair athletes. So what made you kind of specialize in that kind of field?
Yeah, well, the wheelchair racing was again was by accident rather than design. I'd moved to Leeds at this point, and I'd set up with Leeds City a disability athletics squad, but I was also coaching their junior athlete, non-disabled athletes as well.
Yeah.
And I'd had an inquiry from a parent, and their son wanted to get involved in athletics, and they'd come along to the disability session that I had at the club. But this young man was he was a wheelchair user, and the group that I had was all ambulant. It was either ambulant cerebral palsy or learning disabled or intellectual impairment. So it was really not the session for him. And he very politely said, "Thanks very much, but this isn't for us." And he didn't have a racing chair at the time either, and I didn't have any equipment. So cut to 12 months later, and I got another call, and he said, "Do you remember?" And I did remember him because he was a nice guy. And he said, we've been given this racing chair. We want to know if you'd be interested in helping out." So they came down, and we did a couple of sessions together, and that really was the start of the wheelchair racing group. And that was about, I can't quite remember, but something like 2003 or 4. And then just through his own contacts, really, and people that he knew, and then through the work that I was doing within Leeds, within the city council in sports development, we were able to kind of tell other people, and it slowly grew, so that we got more people, and then because we got more people, we needed more equipment, so I needed to apply for more funding just to try and get the right equipment. So that was really the start of it. So literally by accident of, well, by design of the parents, but by accident from me, in that I was in the right place with a potential opportunity that the parent asked about.
Yeah, so that's a lot of hard work trying to set up a group, especially with disability group and needing specific equipment and stuff. So no, I admire that. So in terms of when you've started to begin coaching athletes with lots of different disabilities, did you come across any resources or anything that would kind of help you prepare like sessions, or just have a bit of knowledge of how to coach and kind of involve these athletes in sessions when you started out?
So the kind of the pan disability sessions, I was more fortunate with that because I'd had more experience of that with regards to the work that I did up in Glasgow with Red Star Athletics Club, and so I'd done a little bit of work with some of the athletes with cerebral palsy, some of the intellectually impaired athletes in particular. I'd been on a number of trips with Special Olympics, so I had had a bit more experience and knowledge of the needs for those athletes, whilst also then they were all individuals that then needed a kind of an individual centered approach for what we were doing with them. With the wheelchair racing, it was slightly harder. Whilst I had some experience of coaching wheelchair racing, I didn't have that much knowledge, and so I then had to reach out to a number of people. So I did do that with regards to Ian Thompson, who's not far from me up in the northeast, and then a couple of other people, just to try and sound them out with regards to equipment, type of training. And then a few years later, Peter Eriksson arrived in the UK working for UK Athletics. And he put on a number of coach development sessions that I found really useful as well, but more so in the opportunity to talk to other coaches, and the talking to other coaches and kind of, if I say debating, so we discussed and we argued and we agreed to disagree and we stole different ideas, but I thought that was a really useful opportunity just to help to wanted to work out what I needed to know, but also then kind of cement in my own mind the bits that I liked and fitted in with my own coaching philosophy and way of working, as well as then what was going to be right for the athletes that I was working with at the time.
So I take it, so when you started out, you've had to kind of go and speak to other coaches then to kind of gather everything you know, and it wasn't there to find easily. Was that the case?
It was, yeah. So there was limited resources available. Certainly in the wheelchair racing terms, where when I was first starting out, there was really very limited information, and especially cutting across the kind of the real beginning, so the real kind of the beginner athlete, someone who's just getting into wheelchair racing. Most of the people that I spoke to talked to me about kind of the athletes and training of athletes that were, you know, more experienced and already had access to different bits of equipment and training rollers and all of those things that actually I was several steps and a couple of years behind. So I needed to bring it right back to basics, which there wasn't that much in a resource available at the time.
So then how did you manage to do that? Obviously you've been given this knowledge by all these coaches who've had a lot more experienced coaches. So how did you apply their knowledge to how you could create sessions for your athletes?
So essentially what I look to do is the coaching knowledge that I had in writing training programs anyway, as a qualified coach, and what I looked to do was to apply that to the training of the athletes that I was working with, the wheelchair racers that I was working with, but also then essentially changing a lot. We made a lot of mistakes in those early years with regards to kind of training programs that just were too difficult, too demanding, and in some of the sessions we changed during the sessions because they just weren't working. So we had to adapt, and we had to be flexible with regards to the program. But also then I then had a kind of a longer term plan for some of the athletes that I was working with, because they were quite young. I didn't really want to introduce too early the kind of the strength conditioning, physical preparation work. We wanted them to be able to do some of that stuff, but in a fun kind of a fun environment where there wasn't this pressure to work towards the talent program. But then I must admit that one of the athletes was a junior GB athlete in 2011, 2012, and the pressure was to try and progress into the senior squad and make it to London, and they just weren't quite there yet, and I made the mistake of going along with this kind of this pressure that the athlete felt that I didn't understand. They felt it as pressure. There was a lot of pressure from external forces, like the parents, friends and family, are you going to make it to London, all of those
Yeah.
things. I worked out afterwards that they were doing it for other people and not for themselves.
Yeah.
And that was something that then was a good learning opportunity for me. The athlete had a bit of a break, went to wheelchair basketball for a couple of years and then came back to us, but more enthused and more passionate. And that taught me about writing the training programs, not just thinking about the technical aspects, but also the psychological and person development aspects of training as well, which is vitally important from my perspective, about making sure that the athlete is happy with what they're doing. They're bought into the process, and some of the training plans and programs are sometimes often athlete driven or led rather than myself, because it's them that are driving that.
So I guess you've had this experience where the athlete's not quite achieved what they wanted to achieve. They felt the pressure. So you've found that, like, just like, was it, to be fair, like just kind of taking it back and kind of understanding how they felt then? Is that how you would deal with that situation if that occurred again?
Yes, but it also taught me about making sure that I understand each athlete's individual motivations and their reasons for wanting to be involved in wheelchair racing. And we've got a nice range of athletes at the group at the moment that there's not that much pressure. A lot of them are just wanting to just go fast. So we've got a couple of new athletes that have just started in the last couple of weeks, who just wanted to sit in a racing chair and to be able to try and push fast, and faster than they've pushed in their day chairs. And I think that was something that, for me, that's key, as well as then some of the athletes that are competing that have got, they've got a national or international classification and wanting to progress, and there's no pressure at all to perform. The pressure really is on us to just have a good time at training.
So how do you manage like expectations, say from athletes, say other individuals outside of that, such as like parents and perhaps maybe performance programs? So how do you make sure that your athlete is feeling all right and doing well with coaching, but managing their expectations?
So that's a tricky one, because sometimes the athletes don't tell you everything that they're thinking.
Yeah.
So with regards to parents, and so what I do a lot now is I'm really honest and open with the parents or support personnel around the athletes. So I'll talk to the athlete about what we're wanting to do and what they want to do, and write a program around that. But then if there's parents or other support that they're with, then it's to try, certainly with younger athletes, talking to the parents about that there's no pressure and that there's a longer journey. You can often have a conversation with a parent to say that this is an 8 or a 12-year plan, than you can to a 12-year-old who's thinking that it's like an 8 or a 10-minute plan. It's a big difference. So that's where then just understanding the personalities of individuals as well, with regards to then trying to kind of rein that enthusiasm or that pressure of needing to progress, or needing to personal best, or make it onto a talent program. At the moment, we're not quite there with the athletes. They're a little bit too young. So we've had a bit of a transition. So I think that when that time comes, it's more for me about trying to push the philosophy around just go and enjoy, go and learn from all of those programs, but still enjoy what we're doing. And there's no pressure to perform. Now that's easier said than done, obviously, because once you're on that program, then there is pressure to perform and to make it to the international stage and so on. So that's going to be an interesting one, just to try and maintain that enthusiasm, especially for the younger athletes.
Yeah, So when I was doing some research on you for the webinar, I came across an article, and you spoke about your philosophy, and that's to kind of ensure that all wheelchair racers have the opportunity to grow and develop. And it sounds as if the way that you were saying you're dealing with the pressure and kind of that open communication, you seem to have nailed that in the head. But how else do you ensure how else do you apply your philosophy in sessions?
So that's where we really try to have an athlete-centered approach.
Mm-hmm.
So the group at the moment, there's 4 or 5 athletes that have been with us quite a while, so their training age is relatively high, so they understand around warm-up and sessions and reps and recovery and those things. So that's relatively straightforward to kind of set them off and allow them to do their thing, whilst then I'll try and have an eye on what they're doing. But also then I'll have a quiet chat with each one just to have tailored the program for their individual needs. So whether somebody needs to just do 3 reps instead of 6, so they'll do 1, miss 1, and that's again dependent on what they're training for, or their stage of development within the program. But also then some of the newer athletes. So as an example, real life example, last week was where we had 3 new athletes. 2 of the athletes had been with us the week before, and then another athlete had just turned up. We knew that they were coming, but it was their very first time in a racing chair. So I then spent a lot of time, focused time on them, just to make sure that they were safe in the chair, whilst the other 2 new athletes who'd had some chair control from the previous week were able to go around the track. So I was again setting some kind of basic technical technique targets for them around how to push, how to maintain the chair in the straight line or in the lane. And then there was another group of athletes that were all doing 200-meter reps, and at different ability levels as well. And so it was constantly looking at how I've set everybody off doing their own different things, whilst then trying to keep an eye on everybody and looking at technique, looking at making sure that everybody was safe, but also then making sure then that people were happy with how they were doing. And one of the newer athletes was just struggling to push a little bit with the technique that they were pushing. And so having a quiet word with them just around some adaptations to how they were pushing, but also just to maintain their motivation, because I could see that they were getting a little bit disheartened by not going as fast as everybody else.
Yeah.
And just looking at how to kind of give some positive encouragement, and that positive encouragement then goes to the whole group. But like I said, trying to make sure that sometimes there's just 1 or 2 little interventions for individuals that are required.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And talking about like that session you'd done last week, how do you manage to keep an eye on everyone when they're doing quite like lots of different kind of wee sessions and one kind of group session, and kind of managing your time for each one and making sure, yeah, right, I've watched this group do this rep, right, I need to make sure these guys are on it as well. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, so it was a tough session, if I'm honest. I did have we had another coach who was volunteering with the group before COVID and all of the different lockdowns, and fortunately for him, but unfortunately for us, he got another job which is a little bit further away than where he was living, so he's had to step away. But whilst he was helping us, that became easier, so there was another pair of eyes. So he was really good with regards to wanting to know what to look for, what to look at. He wasn't just there as a stopwatch. So it was a great partnership that we had with Ben. And so just a shame that he's not been able to come back. So it does mean that pressure's on, and it means that things, strategies like being clever with diamonds, and others, you can see them in how they're doing, and then when they're at a certain point, then you can other people going. So I had different groups starting at different times, and different parts and I was looking at different parts of the track at different times as well. And really interestingly, I was setting off 200 meter and he just decided to start the boys off on their 200 meter reps. He just shouted go, and I was just like, hold on a minute, what are you doing? So but it was, you know, it's one of those where it's a challenge, but it's good at the same time.
Yeah, no, so that makes sense. So just going back a bit, I was wondering if you have this coaching education job with England Athletics. Could you speak to us a bit more about that and kind of what that entails?
Yeah, so that essentially is where I look at the kind of the recruitment, the training and development of the tutor team that works on our coach education programs, from the kind of the entry level through to the coach level, and then the event group level beyond that. But also in addition to that is looking at what coach development opportunities that we have across England, and working with my colleagues who are the event group leads and their programs that they have, and mapping how all of that provides linkage between coach education and coach development. And then the next bit across that is then the para athletics program. So I've just been doing a little bit of work with our colleagues at British Athletics to create a para athletics webinar series, and again linked to some of the things around what we talked about earlier with the resources and ideas that didn't exist when I was starting out, to try and provide some more of those opportunities for other coaches who are either just beginning or are involved but want to share ideas, or even just to speak to other people.
Yeah. So then so you're creating these pathways and stuff, and then I guess like opportunities for people to get more information and knowledge about specifically para coaching. So how have you applied your own experiences and knowledge into your job?
Well, that's a really good question with regards to some of the things that I've done. The experiences within wheelchair racing in particular has allowed me to really push forward with regards to resources that didn't exist for wheelchair racing, and working with one of my colleagues, Scott Grace, who created Athletics 365, which is a coaching resource for athletics. We've created a resource for wheelchair racing following the Athletics 365 model, so it's there within the app. It'd never been done before, and we've also we're wanting to push some more with regards to different events. So we're working with a colleague of ours, Phil Fleetwood, on creating some additional resource for frame running, and we're doing some more work with regards to seated throw. So that's allowed, so my job really has allowed me to kind of push a lot more with regards to some of the para athletics programs, and where there's been gaps in my own knowledge, that's allowed me then to reach out to other experts to kind of help us do that, which has then been really beneficial twofold, because one, I've then been able to learn some of the stuff that I didn't know, but also then we've been able to create it as a resource to share to others.
Yeah, well, I'm just started out my coaching kind of career, and I do a little bit of the frame running, so that'll be quite a good resource for me to look at. But as a coach educator, how do you develop coaches and pass on the knowledge that you have?
multiple different routes, really, but the key bit is looking at the working with others and sharing the knowledge. The power in the network is a really good one, and being able to kind of what's the phrase that I learned up in Scotland, chewing the fat. So just chewing the fat and just talking about things, about experiences, about, you know, different ideas, being open for other people to come and quiz you and challenge you, is one of the things that we try and get across within coach development, and certainly within coach education, about having an open mind. Now that works for some people, obviously, and not for others. But what I've looked at as a coach, but also as a coach developer, is to say that the door's always open. That if anybody wants to come to Leeds and see the sessions and see me coaching and just ask me questions, and they're more than welcome to. Now, over the past few years, a few of my colleagues in the coach education fraternity have done that, and that's been really exciting, but also very nerve-wracking, because then I really need to be following what I'm preaching, which fortunately so far I've managed to do.
That's good to know. So I guess when you're speaking about being like open in discussions, and that's how we can like learn from other people, I guess like within wheelchair racing, you've got different kinds of disabilities, some with like neurological coordination difficulties, and then others with spinal cord impairments and limb differences. So how do you like kind of plan sessions for people with all these kind of different impairments, and how do they kind of say, oh, this works for me or this doesn't? I guess because it might be quite challenging for maybe someone like yourself who's able-bodied and maybe doesn't quite feel how they feel in certain situations.
Yeah, and that's a really brilliant question, actually. And that comes back to my point with regards to individual centered. So talking to each athlete with regards to how they can push the chair, how they can propel, what function they have, and then to try and be able to apply that into what we do. So as an example of having an ideal model for how I want an athlete, or how I think that the chair should be pushed, but actually then getting to understand each individual athlete and what they can and can't do around that, and then making adaptations to then the ideal model to then work out the ideal model for that particular athlete. And so you talk about different impairments, but so some of the things that I've had to think about with regards to somebody who was a T52 would push differently to someone who was a T53, but quite a severe T53, and then comparing them to then a T54 who then had quite good trunk function and was able to manipulate the chair with their hips, and then comparing that then to some of the athletes with cerebral palsy and varying degrees of cerebral palsy as well, and again how they would manage the chair differently. And then with the cerebral palsy in particular was the unevenness of the push. So whilst I was trying to look for an evenness of push, then some of them just weren't able to manage that as effectively. And then the other considerations around all of that was then rest and recovery, or the intensity that people were pushing in, and then how much rest they might have needed based on how hard they were working, whether that was through kind of their concentration levels as well as physical exertion, or something else.
And do you find that perhaps how much probably their impairment may affect them in their training sessions? Does that maybe differ with age or of the person? I'm just curious, because I've got my own kind of experiences myself as an athlete, but I was wondering if you've kind of experienced that?
Not so much age as
Yeah.
a dominant factor, but kind of physical fitness and training development. So as an example, one of the athletes that had come back to us after lockdown, so in September time, and hadn't been training as much, and they'd regressed a little bit, but quickly got back to a level that they'd been at, whereas one of the younger athletes had been training every week. We'd done Zoom sessions, so fitness sessions or sessions on the rollers, and they then really had pushed on, pardon the pun for pushing, but they'd done extremely well. So it wasn't necessarily an age thing, but more of a physical fitness aspect.
And just quickly, have you had, like, you know, adults that come through puberty and stuff? Does that affect their impairment with their training? And is that like a consideration that you need to take? And how do you plan for something like that?
So a couple of athletes had gone through puberty, but they were male athletes.
Yeah.
So I've not had to consider the female athletes. So when Hannah Cockcroft was with our group, and she was quite young at the time, but I say young as in I'm sure she was 15 or 16 or 17. So we'd not had to think about her own physical and personal development at that stage, whereas the guys that did, it would, if I'm honest, it was slightly easier for them. I mean, they just became a bit more grumpy. Generally, I mean, they're still grumpy now, and they're like 27 and 30, so I'm allowed to say that they're still grumpy, but that was slightly easier for us, if I'm honest. So I've not had to think about the kind of the female youth development athletes with an impairment, actually.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, because I think for myself, I've noticed as I've gotten older, my CP is a bit different from when I was like 11 or 12. It kind of presents itself in a slightly different way. I was just wondering if maybe some of your athletes have experienced that or not, but I guess it's all quite individual.
Well, yes, absolutely. I think it probably is, and I would expect for female athletes going through puberty and cerebral palsy as well, that then there should be changes. There's changes to all females that are going through that time anyway, and obviously with males as well, with the high levels of testosterone and going through that maturation stage. So it is a consideration that coaches need to think about, and it's really important to understand the athlete, and that essentially comes back to what we were talking about around understanding the athlete, and you know, we talked about setting a training program, but actually I'd ask the athletes at the beginning of the session how they were doing, how they'd been during the day. You know, some of them would say that they'd had a tough day at school. Last week, one of them said that they'd had an hour of adapted rowing, I think it was. So I straight away, I knew that they were going to be tired doing the training session. So I needed to think about, well, actually, I might need to rein in some of the stuff that they're going to be doing. Others had had quite an easy day. One of them had had a tough day as being outside in the playground all day at the school that they work at. So they were more sun frazzled than they were physically tired, but then they were tired because the sun had drained their energy, but they didn't understand that. So it's all of those things that you put together, is that it's that bigger picture of everything that's going on, that you can't teach or put into one coach education program or one course. It's lots of different things that all fit together that you learn over the years of experience, and that comes back to then why I was saying around that networking and talking to others and sharing ideas becomes really very useful.
I guess then that's obviously like then taking time to speak to each of the individual athletes to kind of get a feel as to how they're feeling and perhaps what's making them feel that way, if that's them being tired and stuff. So I'd quite like to know what are the positives and benefits have you found in disability coaching, and to kind of contradict that, has there been any challenges that you've found?
The positives have most definitely been that I've really had to focus on an individual centered approach. When I first started coaching, very much was coaching a group.
Yeah.
And certainly with the non-disabled group, the junior group at Leeds City, then there was like 25 kids that were just starting out doing athletics, and so we're very much looking at the group. Working with the disabled group and then back into the wheelchair racing group, very much having to understand every individual, and that's been really powerful. We talk about an individual centered approach anyway within athletics, and how valuable that is to athletes. And so the work that I've done over the years has helped to cement that as a coaching philosophy and coaching tool. The challenge has been understanding the impairments, because you've just talked about that everybody's different and we're all individuals. So again, working with individual athletes is one thing, but trying to understand an impairment or the various aspects of that impairment for that individual that might be slightly different to what I may have known in the past, because they may have something else that has an impact on their training or how they push the chair. So that's certainly been a challenge, and because it's so vast, the whole aspect of impairments, then it's, I'm not a specialist in physiotherapy and or that side of things. So I very much rely on the athletes or the athletes and their parents to explain to me what they need me to know. And that's more to do with then the functionality of how to push the chair and what they need with regards to rest and recovery and that sort of thing, rather than anything particular about, whether it's an acquired impairment or what the differences in the impairments are.
Yeah, no, I guess because I was speaking to one of my older coaches, and there's always a kind of a debate as to, every athlete's an individual, doesn't matter about their disability. And then on the flip side, there's, well, we should consider their impairment and their disability because that's really important in planning their session. But what is your take on that?
I think it's a really interesting one, because I think I agree with both in the sense of that I treat every athlete as an individual, but I also then will look at considering the impairment, like we've talked about, so that we can tailor the needs of the athlete within the program. So there's no point me writing a training program that would suit Hannah, for example, who's a very talented elite level performer. There's no point in me asking somebody who's brand new into the sport, who's still a T34, but getting them to do the same sessions as Hannah, because actually Hannah, in her aerobic capacity, her ability to generate force, all of those things are completely different to someone who's brand new. Conversely, having a look at then somebody who has got reduced lung capacity, for example, may well then have a slightly reduced aerobic capacity, and therefore we might need to then think about additional rest and recovery, and all of that then links you back to then, is that something that I need to know about as the coach for that particular athlete? Because that has a knock-on effect of the training, and that's where then that conversation would become quite useful.
Yeah. Good. Well, I've got your final question for you, and that is, do you have any advice for any coaches that are considering or have just started out with para-coaching?
Absolutely, yeah. My suggestion would be, first and foremost, go out there and enjoy yourself. Coaching athletics is fantastic anyway. I've been doing it for 20 something years now. I shall not say how long, but quite a while. And I wouldn't be doing it if I really didn't love it. So that, for me, that's fundamental. Every session we go out there and we have a good time. The other bit, though, I would say is try and find as much resource as you possibly can for what you're wanting to coach and who you're wanting to coach. England Athletics have created a number of resources that are available for people via Athletics 365 or the Athletics Hub that we've talked about. But actually, there's other resources out there as well that people can access. You could just put a search in, couldn't you? And you can. The world's a slightly different place to when I first started. So
yeah,
you can just do a quick internet search and you can find different resources, and then try and speak to other people. People have got my details. If they wanted just to get in touch, I'm happy to talk stuff through around all sorts of things regarding para athletics, if that's what people wanted to do, or even to be able to try and signpost people as well. So definitely search out knowledge and experiences that are going to help you would be my advice.
perfect. Sounds like a good note to finish on. I'm just going to have a look at some of the questions. If you bear with me a minute. Sorry, apologies.
I don't think we've got any.
We've not got any.
Chat, Maria, no. But if anyone on the call has got a question and they want to unmute and maybe come on the camera and ask it. I've got one question while we're waiting in case.
Okay.
So you mentioned earlier, Paul, about how important it is to find out sort of an athlete's individual motives for wanting to take part. So is there a specific way that you do this? Do you sort of have a specific conversation and ask them outright, or do you sort of casually go through it in training? What's your approach to finding this out?
A little bit of a mix, if I'm honest. It depends on how the relationship has developed with the individual athlete. So some of the athletes, like I say, are quite young, so they're quite reserved. So it'll be a drip feed effect with regards to kind of what you're wanting to do. I did have that conversation with the 3 new athletes recently with regards to what's brought you to wheelchair racing, what is it that you're wanting to do, how can we help with that, and essentially all 3 of them just said, I want to push fast. Mm-hmm. So that was their motivation. So that gives me that starting point, and beyond that then will be looking at where we want to go. So there's another young athlete who's been with us for a few years now, and he's very talented. And I'll tell him that, but I'll tell him that in a slightly different way, and we'll talk about what he wants to do with regards to the next competition. So he's only 13, so I'm not wanting to look at kind of that longer term plan, but I've had that conversation with his mum and dad to say we don't want to put any pressure on him, and actually can we still maintain his enjoyment and his engagement, and carry on doing wheelchair basketball and doing other stuff that he does and really enjoys, whilst the focus for him absolutely is he just wants to push as fast as he possibly can. We're not putting any pressure on him. And I asked him about, what does he want to do now that we're back at the track, and he just said, I'm just going to try and PB on my next competition. And for me, that for that young age, that's all right with me. That next step bit of it's short term, there's no point me talking to them about, you know, have we got plans for Paris or for Los Angeles, which we possibly have. And in the back of my mind, and for his parents, we can talk about that later on, maybe it's in a couple of years when he's a bit older. So that's a different conversation. And then for some of the older athletes is having those conversations around kind of that talent pathway program, but then transitioning into they're beyond that now, and they're kind of in their older years. So we talked about a 27-year-old and a 30-year-old. The 30-year-old has just retired. They've just bought a house. We had a really good conversation. He was the one who started with me all those years back, and he just said, Paul, I need to think about, am I going to spend thousands of pounds on wheelchair racing and traveling to Switzerland and wherever else where the competitions were, or do I invest that in the house? Because I'm not going to make the GB team, and as much as I love wheelchair racing, I need to make a conscious decision on where I invest my money. And that was quite a tough conversation, but real life, with regards to kind of where they were at as an athlete and where they wanted to take things. So again, you know, that whole relationship that we create, and kind of knowing him for what was 15, 16, 17 years, is a great relationship that we have, but also quite tough to be able to say, actually, our wheelchair racing relationship has come to an end.
Yeah. I guess that is like for a coach kind of dealing with that, normally you'd think it was the athlete who'd be kind of told about these kind of stuff, where there's maybe a bit of a shock to the plan. But how have you dealt with that as a coach?
So I kind of was expecting it, and yeah, so for him, that was fine, and that was kind of, we have a good relationship, and we still speak fairly regularly anyway.
Yeah.
So that, you know, that whole relationship, and we've become friends outside of athletics rather than that was our relationship. Yeah. That's quite nice. The athlete that was in the junior squad and then decided, when they didn't make it to the senior squad in 2012, that was a tough call that I wasn't expecting, where they said they were going to take a step back, because I hadn't anticipated that, and they were still quite young, I think at the time, maybe 17 or 18, and I kind of saw a lot of progression for them. So it was a shock when they said that they were going to take a step back, but the fact that they then wanted to come back, they just came back because they weren't doing anything one day. They'd had an injury from basketball. I say an injury, they pushed into a wall and broke their knee, so that was, you know, a bit more of an injury than normal. Yeah. But they, on their recovery, they'd come and seen the training, said hello to people again, and just fell in love with wheelchair racing again. And that was, for me, that was key to getting them, when they came back, to getting them to just enjoy themselves. And they've been with us ever since.
No, thank you for that. Has anyone else got any questions, or are we quite happy to wrap up there?
Thanks, Gus.
Thank you very much for coming along.
I think we will call it there then, guys. So thank you very much, Maria and Paul, firstly, and thank you everyone else for coming along and being part of it. As we said earlier, this will go on YouTube tomorrow, so please do watch it back if you want to hear Paul and Maria again. Share it on social media, share it with your networks, and keep an eye out on the ParaCoach social media at the end of this week, because we'll be announcing our next guest for Maria's Coaching Corner, which is very soon. So thank you very much, and enjoy your evenings, everyone.
Thank you.